Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Transportation Systems Management and Operations Program Planning, Developing and Sustaining a TSMO Mission for Your Organization. My name is Nilu Parvin-Ashtiani and I will help facilitate today's webinar. Today's webinar is a joint effort where FHWA has helped with the planning of this webinar and the National Operations Center of Excellence or NOCO has helped with hosting the webinar. If you don't know already about NOCO, at NOCO we support the transportation systems management and operations by offering a variety of resources to them. So on your screen right now you see a useful links pod where 4 links are shared with you. So these are different ways you can connect with us, including our knowledge center on our website, our bi-weekly newsletter where we share the major TSMO events, and our Twitter. So this webinar and all the NOCO webinars are being recorded, and the recording along with the presentation slides are shared with you after the webinar. One way you can be notified of the webinar recording is to subscribe to NOCO YouTube channel. So once webinar is uploaded, you will be notified there also. Also, you can download the slides for today's webinar directly from here, from the Download Slides Resources pod. This is available now and also during Q&A at the end. We have a question and answer session in 2 parts. First, after all the state DOTs are done, we'll jump to Q&A where our moderator will read each question out loud and direct it to the presenter. So what you need to do is that since all the lines are muted for the participants, you will be using the question discussion pod that you can see right now on your screen to type down your questions. And please do that anytime during the webinar as they come to your mind, and then during Q&A we will do that. So the second part of Q&A will be after the state's presentations and then FHWA Resource Center presentation at the very end of the webinar. So feel free to share your thoughts, comments, or any questions that you have during the webinar over there. So that is what I had in terms of logistics. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jocelyn to start us off with the webinar.
Thanks, Nilu. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Jocelyn Bauer with Leidos, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I served as the project manager for the development of the Federal Highways primer on Transportation Systems Management and Operations, or TSMO Program Planning, and co-instructor for the Federal Highway TSMO Program Planning workshops. Today's webinar will showcase Federal Highway's recent efforts in advancing TSMO program planning. As you can see on the slide here, we have the agenda for this afternoon. We'll start off the webinar with an overview of the recent Federal Highway primer on TSMO program planning from Jim Hunt and Pat Noyes. Jim Hunt is a transportation specialist on the Organizing and Planning for Operations team in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Operations. In this role, he develops guidance, performs outreach, and leads research and planning for operations, active transportation and demand management, benefit cost analysis, and organizational institutional capabilities for TSMO. Pat Noyes of Pat Noyes & Associates has over 30 years of experience in transportation planning, operations, and management, and has led 6 Federal Highway TSMO program planning workshops. She is currently working with a number of states to develop their TSMO programs. She was one of the lead authors on the the Federal Highway TSMO program planning primer. You'll then hear from TSMO leaders at 3 state departments of transportation that recently hosted Federal Highway program planning workshops. Monica Harwood will be our first state speaker. She serves as a statewide transportation operations engineer for the Washington State DOT, focusing on integration of TSMO within the agency as a whole. Specifically, she supports the implementation of TSMO focused on business processes and workforce development. Rod Schilling will then present from the perspective of the Nevada DOT, whereas he is the Assistant Chief Traffic Operations Engineer. Rod is the Traffic Operations Lead for the Nevada DOT's TSMO program. Susan Anderson will be our last state speaker. Susan works for the Arizona Department of Transportation as the Systems Technology Group Manager of the Transportation Systems Management Operations, or TSMO Division. We'll then have time to address some questions from the webinar audience, so please do type in your questions or comments into the chat box, and we'll address those after the state speakers finish. And then to conclude the webinar presentations, Daniel Great from Federal Highway will provide a synopsis of the TSMO Program Planning Roundtables that many of you may have already attended or seen online. Daniel Great is a Sharp 2 ITS specialist with the Federal Highway Resource Center operations team in Atlanta, Georgia. And with that, I will hand things over to Jim, who will start us off here.
Okay, thanks so much, Jocelyn, and thanks again to the Center of Excellence for your partnership and helping us get our word out about some of our new products. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to introduce the project that Jocelyn managed and I managed from the Federal Highway side, which is this primer on TSMO program planning, and then Pat Noyes will go into more detail as to what we included in that. So firstly, this is really an effort to assist states in getting started and kind of formalizing their TSMO programs. It's one of the most common most frequent outcomes or gaps identified when we did the capability maturity workshops across the country. There was a lack of a real standard, a real formalized program in place, unlike what most states have for their traditional legacy road and bridge programs. So the intent was to give folks an idea of what it might look like to develop one of these, to take a look at some of the leading states at the time that have been successful in creating a TSMO program plan. And then we went out and we did, like Jocelyn said, a number of workshops. I think there were 6, and 3 of the 6 you'll hear from today. So it's a good opportunity to kind of see where we are, where we came from, where we started, and what the results have been to date. So like I mentioned, the motivation was to assist agencies in kind of formalizing their program. What we found over the last 15 or so years was that there's been a lot of progress in, say, ITS deployment and deployment of operational strategies. There were also, over time, more and more recognition from a strategic sense that operations and TSMO was important business area for implementing agencies. But really what was lacking was a real core focus on the program itself. Again, unlike the traditional programs, say, at state DOTs, there were still gaps in workforce, in organizational structure, in working TSMO into all the facets of the program, from planning to scoping to design to how you do Carter and sub-area analyses, how maintenance considers real-time operations. So that's really what a lot of the focus has been, those areas, as we have gone out and done the workshops, and I think you'll hear some of that from the 3 states on the panel today. Just to mention that we've got a number of completed and ongoing efforts, all centered around this idea of organizing for operations, improving organizational capabilities for TSMO. The workshops and primer itself, which is the focus of the webinar today, is one component. But we've got the first 2 sub-bullets there are active research projects, one on mainstreaming transportation systems management and operations, and one that'll be a whole set of new workshops that will be available on integrating travel time reliability into transportation systems management, and then a related project is integrating travel time reliability into planning for operations. And then the last 4 bullets are hyperlinks to products and resources that have been complete and are available. So, for example, the capability maturity frameworks, those were a set of capability maturity model type tools and self-assessment tools and action planning guidance in 6 areas of operations, and kind of relate well with TSMO program planning as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding TSMO, and again, this is the National Operations Center of Excellence audience. I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir a bit here. So I'm just going to highlight, those maybe terms in the definition of TSMO and some of the strategies that, may give us some pause as to, okay, why might we want to do a TSMO program plan? How might it be different? What are some of the unique nuances and challenges associated with TSMO program planning as opposed to traditional capital infrastructure programs? So here's a definition of TSMO that was included in the MAP 21 legislation. And just some things that might jump out is the fact that we're talking about, multimodal considerations, focus on outcomes, not just delivering projects, but what are we getting in terms of performance. Multimodal, like I said, multi-jurisdictional. It's not just projects. You see in the second bullet, we're interested in services. We're trying to preserve existing capacity, not necessarily build more capacity, although that may be a component as well. Security of the system and reliability of the system. So these are just some of the buzzwords that kind of might make you take a step back and say, wow, how well are we really geared in our agency to deliver operations services in light of these these considerations and maybe serve as a further motivation. So again, we're trying to cast a wide net in terms of the various types of tools and strategies that fall under the TSMO umbrella. I think we had a very interesting workshop in Washington, not to put Monica on the spot, but I think their view might even go well beyond these more traditional types of tools to considering roundabouts and striping and other type of efforts that might be considered TSMO from that perspective. So a lot of these are common to, familiar to many of you, but I would just point out again that there's some unique, newer emerging services that again speak to the need for maybe a revisiting or creating for the first time this TSMO program plan. So on the bottom of the first column, we're interested in improving corridors, not just facilities. So how do we do a better job at integrated corridor management? And then the last couple on the right column there, looking at more demand management, integrating demand management into operations and coordinating with other modes, and active transportation demand management, active traffic management, and then connected and automated vehicles. So, again, trying to position agencies to be prepared for these newer services that are quite, are moving quite aggressively into our space. So one of the things we'll talk about that Pat will mention, and I think the states will mention too, is one of the elements of the TSMO program planning is developing a business case. And oftentimes we use indicators like you see here. I mean, anytime you look at before and after studies for TSMO deployments, you tend to get very, if you captured the before data and the after data, you would often see very high, very high performing results. So safety and delay and mobility and fuel, air quality. I think increasingly we're expanding so what goes into that business case argument, and we're seeing some more examples of agencies that are bringing things up like economic development and business productivity, different, we're trying to modernize our infrastructure to be sort of 21st century and prepare for those newer services and technologies that I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of some of the elements that might go into what we call our business case, which is part of the strategic element of the program planning. And then these last couple kind of present show the transition of where we were and where we're going. And again, I think gives some indication as to where and when program planning for TSMO is needed and is relevant. So traditionally, we've looked at operations and maintenance as sort of the last phase after project delivery. It's been very reactive and focused on, average conditions, average and peak period issues. And with TSMO, we're interested in the whole life cycle of the project. Like I said earlier, getting operations considered in planning, design, maintenance. And we're thinking not just of being reactive, but through things like active traffic management, being even proactive and even predictive, and certainly not just limiting our scope of things to recurring situations, but non-recurring events as well. Similarly, some of the performance measures historically are in a lot of ways outdated and antiquated. So, with TSMO, we're more focused on the reliability of the system. We're not just looking at individual parts of the network, but the entire system, looking at both people and goods, and integrating those strategies together. So hopefully that just provides a little bit of a kind of a backdrop to the motivation and why we're seeing a lot of traction with TSMO program planning. I'm going to now turn it over to Pat to get into more details as to what we cover in the TSMO program planning primer. Pat.
All right, thank you, Jim. I appreciate the setup. I'm going to very, very quickly go through the contents of the program primer. It is available online if you don't have a hard copy of it. So I'm just going to do top of the waves, and hopefully you will download it or read through it and find the backup material for all of this. The first thing I wanted to do is talk a little bit about why we do Transportation Systems Management and Operations Program Planning. And really the idea here is to create a sustainable, cohesive program that can continue over a number of years and can set some long-term vision and mission for TSMO activities and guide those activities to support the mission of the agency itself. So it's really a matter of how can we formalize it in a way that will integrate it and mainstream TSMO across the agency. The TSMO Program Planning Primer is set up to address three basic areas of TSMO program planning: the strategic areas, the programmatic areas, and the tactical areas. And we'll talk briefly about each one of those. So the strategic areas include vision, mission, goals, those kinds of things. It sets the high-level strategic business case, as Jim mentioned, for why we want to do TSMO as a core activity for our agency and how it supports the mission and vision of the overall agency. So the business case itself really looks at the kinds of things that Jim had outlined. It looks at the specific challenges for your state or your region so that you know exactly why you are motivated to do this. And it starts to anticipate some of the future challenges and emerging opportunities to really provide a cost-effective way of delivering TSMO as part of your core agency mission. So the vision and mission really helps set the direction for where you're going. So there's a shared direction in terms of a vision that helps to focus on high-level outcomes for the system, and then really looks at the role that the agency plays in delivering that and the role of the TSMO program in delivering that for the overall agency. Each of these slides you'll notice has an example in them. I'm not going to spend time going through the examples today, but throughout the primer there are examples of applications of each one of these elements of TSMO program planning to help you visualize what we're talking about a little bit more. So the strategic goals and performance objectives are really oriented toward the system. It's how the system works for our customers. So it really helps to specify what we want to get in terms of planning outcomes, and is based on developing some shared goals and objectives, delivering some understanding through data analysis and data collection, and then collaborating to really help to bring those goals and objectives to fruition for the system and the users. One of the things that a number of states have done, and some of the regions as well, is to maybe start off with a more limited focus rather than trying to be fully comprehensive from the very start, to sort of build up from the grassroots in terms of their TSMO programs. So there's been some effort to create some strategic focuses within the program planning effort. So some states have done a geographic focus. For example, California, that is now embarking on a statewide TSMO initiative, started really with a corridor-based initiative to develop TSMO plans for specific corridors. Similarly, functional areas may be used. A lot of states actually their TSMO programs have evolved out of some of the early work they did in traffic incident management program planning. So they have identified some functional areas such as TIM or work zone management to help really lay a groundwork for a larger TSMO effort. So starting with some specific functional areas first. And then similarly, some states have started specifically looking at internal capabilities in terms of how they can start to develop and evolve a TSMO program. So those are just some examples of some of the ways that you can evolve this in a way that is appropriate and specific to your agency. So looking at the programmatic elements, the program is really there to develop the specifics of the things you need to make a sustainable, ongoing, formal effort. It's the institutional pieces, the organizational structure, the institutional pieces, the business processes that are really important to help make TSMO an ongoing, everyday activity that integrates with the other activities within the agencies. So defining an organizational structure is important, and that is incredibly personal to each state in terms of where that feels right and where they want to go with it. So for example, a couple of states have created TSMO divisions, Arizona and Colorado. Others have developed TSMO underneath their operations division. In Iowa, they have a Systems Operations Bureau where the TSMO effort resides, and that's within the Highway Division. Others have put it within the Office of Traffic and Operations. And then Maryland is a unique example of where they have created kind of a matrix structure of an organization of organizations within the agency, so that they have a program manager who acts as a liaison across the various offices and divisions to deliver the TSMO program. So organizational structure, as I say, is unique to each state or region. And then some of the program objectives that we really want to look at is the real focus of developing the program objectives, which are different from the strategic objectives, which are systems focused. These are really focused on evaluating and tracking the effectiveness of how we deliver the TSMO program, how we actually do the day-to-day work. So some of the things that those tend to address, there's some examples in the slide from Maryland of things that are really program objectives, but they typically address things like how the plans and programs and documents that we need to develop to formalize the program, in enhancing staff capabilities and workforce development, looking at how we are providing traveler information and customer service, and specifying specific resource needs that we need to really make a robust and strong program. So identifying staffing and workforce needs is a really interesting and challenging effort because there are so many emerging new areas that fall under TSMO that are non-traditional to a design, build, maintain kind of infrastructure-based DOT. So as we shift toward TSMO culture, we start to need to expand our core TSMO staff, our capabilities, a variety of new skill sets, a lot of technology-focused skills and needs. And so NOCOE right now is working with on an NCHRP project that will provide some information that will be posted, I think, later this fall on that will be helpful. Looking at the resource needs and management, whether that's staffing needs or financial needs. So a lot of states don't currently have formal budget line items for TSMO. Some are starting to do that. So really helping to define what are the resource needs in terms of funding and assets so that those can be worked into a larger overall resource management framework for the agency. So for example, in this slide, the Iowa DOT uses an interstate conditions evaluation report for identifying infrastructure investment needs. They've added to that a new operations piece so they have what they call ICE Ops as a tool for prioritizing investments within the operations arena. And then developing business processes and management strategies. Scott Marler with Iowa DOT says that this is not the fun stuff, but it's the stuff that makes it happen. And so it's really important to understand how TSMO may have different needs in terms of your traditional processes that are much more designed for infrastructure construction, capacity construction, and maintenance. And so looking really at what are the processes in terms of procurement, contracting, how you manage your data, how you develop decision support systems based on the data, both for real-time and for investment decisions. So there are a lot of really day-to-day kind of business processes that need to evolve to be more effective in the TSMO arena. Integrating TSMO into agency planning is another thing that can be looked at under that same umbrella, and that is that right now most of our planning processes at the state level are designed really to identify capacity investment needs. So how can we start bringing in management and operations strategies and tools to be an effective player in that decision process of planning and programming? And then in terms of culture, promoting and embedding TSMO culture really needs to happen across the entire organization. FHWA is working right now on a project on mainstreaming TSMO, and it really is to look at what do we need to do to shift from a culture of construction and maintenance to a culture of construction, maintenance, and management and operations. So it isn't a replacement, but it's an expansion of the culture that we've traditionally had within DOTs. So we're looking at how do we build connections between all of the divisions, all of the silos within a DOT, and build improved collaboration. Some of the tactical elements, Jim showed a slide that had lots of examples. We're not going to go through all of the specifics, but what I think is really important is to understand what tools you're comfortable with and then make sure that you have a functional way of making decisions about how you prioritize services, activities, and projects so that you can deliver a informed and formalized set of strategies and a work plan going forward. A couple things, and also in terms of the strategies, it's also helpful if you can develop policies and guidelines so that you understand as you make decisions and start to implement some of these tactics, what are the guidelines that you need to follow, or it's similar to a warrant or some other decision process that helps you make some decisions about where things belong. So a couple things worth noting that cut across all three levels, strategic, programmatic, and tactical, are performance management and financial management. So you can see there are attributes to each one of those across all three of the levels of planning. And so those are worth considering as you go through. And then finally, just in closing on this section, this provides a really basic outline of what, if you were to put together a program planning document, a plan, this is an example from the primer on some of the key elements that you would want to include in that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Monica to talk about WSDOT's experience with TSMO program.
All right. Thank you, Pat. I would love to work for Nevada, but I don't. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to kind of share our testimony this morning about how WSDOT has come to where we're at in the frame of mind of program planning. Just to give you a little context, I think it's important because we all have individual walks as agencies. I give you a little background on WSDOT. WSDOT has had a very historical and long-established division and function for traffic operations in our agency that's been well supported. and valued by the agency, and that means that we've had dedicated funding and foundational programs that have gotten a lot of value seen by the traveling public, and those include things like incident response and cutting-edge ITS technologies. But as the conversation of TSMO has evolved over the years, WashDOT started thinking about what is the difference between traffic operations and TSMO, and do we rename our traffic operations TSMO? And we personally chose not to do that, and I'll kind of clarify that a little bit through my presentation, why we didn't, and how it framed our context of what we're going to be doing with program planning. So, sorry. And so just how the timeline of how we got here, it all kind of began with the capability maturity model effort that rolled out. For us, that was 2014 when we did our original assessment. And then in 2017, we did a reassessment. And particularly that 2017, we were really ready as an agency to look at TSMO in a different light. We just had a lot of efforts going in our agency that were elevating conversations to higher levels that required more interaction within the agency and external to the agency for TSMO. And you can see some of those highlights in there, but particularly it was like our planning efforts along corridors. It was the regional collaboration that we were needing to do to move some of our strategies forward, and things like performance frameworks, where you're asking not only to design projects around certain performance measurements and targets, but also then to monitor them, just required more than what we define as traffic operations. And so, it had to be something that became an agency culture and a way of doing business. And to be honest, after that 2017 reassessment, we really were kind of struck with how big of an endeavor this would be, and we all can acknowledge that when we're trying to change big things within our agencies. And so, just to give you a little perspective more of what that meant to us, this goes back to kind of what Jim was portraying about what is the definition of TSMO, and we all do all of this, but the things in red were the things above and beyond that we started focusing on, and that was regarding capacity as an asset. Asset management is a very hot topic in most of our agencies right now, and we wanted to interject that capacity is an asset to our agency. It's not just about being more efficient, but it's preserving what we already have out there, to talk the talk that we are doing for our pavements and our bridges and those things. That capacity is just as valuable an asset. The other thing was safety. We talk a lot about mobility, and that mobility and safety have an interrelational existence, but that safety performance is just as much an enhancement and a value to TSMO as mobility is. And then moreover, we are very guilty of doing what we kind of fault others with, and that is they don't think about ITS solutions, and we tend to still think about single occupancy vehicles. And where we're at in Washington State is just full out the acknowledgement we're not going to get there without multimodal, intermodal, and cross-jurisdictional TSMO strategies being the reality of how we have to develop things. And so as you can see, that really kind of changes your conversation from being about ITS technologies to and being about your traffic operations division to involving other divisions in your agency like program management and public transportation, multimodal planning, project development. They now have to be involved and have an interest in being involved. And so in WashDOT, kind of we came up with this saying that it's not just about mobility, single occupancy vehicles, urban corridors, traffic operations, WashDOT, people, technology, or typical users. It's more than all of those things. And so as we were kind of melding that new definition, we really needed to solidify what does the TSMO umbrella within WashDOT look like. And this is a graphic that we tried to use to depict that. And if you look at each one of those silos or buckets from the left to the right, if you look at the second, fourth, and fifth columns, which are ITS improvements, cooperative automated transportation, and traditional traffic operations, that within WashDOT is what we would define under the provision of traffic operations. But if we were to truly integrate other things like land use planning and multimodalism and system and corridor planning, then we would have to include planning and partnering and travel demand management, and those are represented by other divisions in our agency. And so that's a very, that is kind of how we are organized and funded as an agency, but that's not where we necessarily wanted to head into the future in the development of TSMO strategies or how we wanted to fund them. And so we kind of took all those strategies, all those example strategies that are listed underneath there, and instead of categorizing them by buckets or divisions or responsibilities, on this next slide, we tried to look at it as to how would you implement them. And there's a whole lot of information going on with this graphic, and there's multiple ways we can present this graphic. But essentially what it is showing a corridor and how you might implement TSMO throughout a corridor over time, going from very passive management where you're doing more of like traveler information and just basic transportation services to the far right when you are truly actively managing a corridor. And again, there's a whole lot we could talk about this, but what I wanted to show is that when you look at any point along that spectrum, there is more than traffic operations that is involved to integrate that. And that's what we're focusing on, is what do our business processes and our culture and all the other things that require need to look like to deliver a system-wide TSMO integration at that point for any corridor. So that's kind of our goal. And it's helped us just kind of clarify that. So where are we actually at with TSMO program planning? We don't have one. We certainly have some individual efforts within the agency. We have ITS planning, we have low-cost enhancement planning, we have incident response, but we have no overarching strategic plan for either A, traffic operations, or B, for the bigger TSMO program planning. And they don't relate to any of our statewide plans, which are things like our Moving Washington or our planning, corridor planning initiatives, or Practical Solutions, which is an initiative in our agency. And so at the same time of not having existing plans, we had some fairly big efforts going on, and we needed to tie some synergy. And those efforts included major workforce development efforts to look at how do we teach people about TSMO, both within traffic operations, within the agency, and externally. How do we develop business processes that fund TSMO across phases and across modes? How do we do the community involvement that's required to do that, as well as that mobility framework? And so we watched other states and what they were doing, and we saw some of the direct benefits they were getting from engaging in a planning effort. And so we said we need to pursue this, and fortunately we were presented with this opportunity to hold this workshop. And so we did that, and going into the workshop, we said our goal is two things. We want to more effectively deliver all the things that we're doing currently, and we need to identify bigger ones. And then we also need to work that bigger picture of identifying how TSMO fits in the agency and using that to identify and leverage more resources. And so what are our challenges with TSMO program planning? Well, I think the biggest one for an agency who has had a long-established traffic operations division, my analogy is kind of like renovating an old house if you're living in it. Having an old house, you have to maintain it, which in and of itself is a full-time job. And then all of a sudden you're trying to renovate it too. And that takes a lot of energy to maintain both of those focus areas at the same time. So what we're looking at right now within WashDOT is how do we balance the focus of established programs like incident response that have room for improvement, but also pursue those new efforts like corridor planning, which additionally take new resources. And we're hoping that our program planning is going to help us be very strategic in that. One of the second challenges for us is we have various levels of maturity about TSMO integration within the agency. For example, within traffic operations, it's much more mature than, say, project development, who just haven't traditionally thought about operations as they're designing systems. We have, as all of you on the phone, resource availability is always a challenge. And then I think any time we're doing planning, there is that struggle of a commitment not only to the development, but the implementation of a plan. And implementation, not only working a plan, but revisiting the plan and continuing the planning cycle. So those are our challenges. And as far as where we're at right now, we held the TSMO Program Planning Workshop in June. We were very blessed to have that. It was a great workshop. July and August, we spent some time doing some research on what all you other states are doing and how to align our planning efforts with what we want. We're currently in the RFP development, and we're going to be doing a phased development of our plan. We're going to do kind of one phase, which is the bigger agency-wide, which will focus kind of at a higher level, a more strategic level. And then we will be doing another phase of planning, which is for traffic operations, who at this point can get into a more detailed programmatic and tactical layer. And so we're going to work through that with a consultant, what that looks like. And we're hoping to kick off our program planning at the beginning of 2019. And we don't hope it's just program planning, a one-time effort. We want to have a cyclic effort that's develop, implement, redevelop, go deeper, go broader, and then implement and continue that cycle. And so that's just kind of our story, our testimony for WSDOT, and I hope some of you. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Monica. And so next up, we're going to be hearing from Rod Schilling from the Nevada DOT.
Hello, everybody. And I want to thank you for this opportunity as well. And I'm going to give a little bit of a history for the Nevada Department of Transportation as far as where we currently are and where we came from through my tenure for the last 20 years. We started out as a traffic safety division. And then as time evolved through my tenure, we kind of went into what we call maintenance and operations. So the operations component of the original traffic safety division included the network analysis and then our operational programs like Freeway Service Patrol, TIM, and so forth. And then the ITS sections went under the maintenance division. And then in the last 7 years, what has happened is we've changed again, and then we went back to a traffic operations division. So again, those operational components, including the ITS and network analysis, went back under the original portion of the traffic safety to include, our signing, striping, traffic control, and signals lighting sections to become the new traffic operations division. So that's currently where we are. Traffic safety is still there. They're under the planning section, and maintenance included asset management. So I want to kind of walk into our current team as part of our TSMO program planning efforts. We utilize consultant services with Atkins and Pat Noyes and Associates to help develop our program plan. We've identified a team of senior Nevada leadership to include all of our assistant directors from the engineering division, our operations division, planning, the stormwater program that was initiated here in the last few years, and then we have 3 districts within the state of Nevada. So we have a District 1 in southern Nevada, District 2 up here in the northwest, and then in the northeast we have District 3. And then also our partnering agencies with the Southern Nevada Regional Transportation Commission, Northern Washoe Regional Transportation Commission, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and then also our Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. And those are part of our what we considered our TSMO Champions team. Part of our program planning efforts in the development, like I was saying, first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we had buy-in and engagement with our senior Nevada leadership. So we did that early in about February of 2017. And then we wanted to make sure that we had some designated TSMO champions, and so we worked with each of those assistant directors and so forth so that we can have designated TSMO champions as part of our program plan efforts. One of the key elements that we wanted to look at too was completing the business case and get buy-in with the TCT, and we've done that as well. And now what we're doing is moving forward, and we want to complete the program plan, just like Pat was talking about, with our strategic, tactical, and programmatic elements. And part of that, too, is to make sure when we're doing this is we have a focus on the end user. We want to have the engagement and integration with everything within the department, collaboration. You know, there's going to be a definite change in the culture. So we have to look at that, you know, and then look at, you know, the system reliability and how do we optimize our existing infrastructure. This is part of our business case that we've established. So the state of Nevada, the population, of course, back in 1990 all the way up through 2008 prior to the recession, we were the fastest growing state in the nation. With the latest Census Bureau in 2017, we're now the second fastest growing state in the nation. So by 2026, we're looking at a projected population of 4.3 million. So that's huge, you know, to the demand on our infrastructure with our transportation system. And what are we going to do to help relieve that, you know, for a system reliability? The other thing, too, with the state of Nevada, we're a huge tourism-based economy. So half of our workforce is also part of the service provider sector. So just to look at that and to what it is that we can do to make sure that we do have that system reliability for the everybody within our transportation system. Congestion, associated costs, we looked at that. And the average cost to the user annually is $1,400. You know, that's a huge cost to each driver on our transportation system, with a loss of 60 hours, you know, annually. So this is part of the business case that's going to help us with our TSMO efforts. Same thing with VMT. We realize that there's a huge increase, you know. Just by 2030 alone, you know, there's a 30% increase, and there's 34 billion vehicle miles traveled on our infrastructure within the state. So what are some of the things that we're looking to do to alleviate some of those, you know, under congestion and everything else? We're utilizing some crowdsourcing techniques in the Waycare platform. We did a pilot program down south in southern Nevada, and with that pilot program, it's using predictive analysis. We've seen a shift of about 12 minutes savings in reduction on first responders to get the roads cleared. Other management strategies that we're looking to include, you know, include active traffic management, and we're going to do that in southern Nevada as well, along one of the most congested areas within the state of Nevada, and hope to see another 20% reduction just in the secondaries there alone. And utilizing programs like TIM, we've seen a reduction just in the secondaries within southern Nevada by including secondary crashes within our crash forms. We've seen 51% reduction just in the secondary crashes alone, just in southern Nevada. Why TSMO and why now? Well, after the state of the practice, just like Pat was talking about, you know, most of the states, you know, are engaging with, there's 40% that are engaging in TSMO activities, and we want to make sure that we're doing that to include our operations and management in the future of our DOT. We have support from upper management and the appetite for that change, and then we have current synergy with our ADOT planning section and our performance analysis section for performance-based decision making. And I'll discuss some of that as we're moving forward too. So, you know, with the increase in the public expectation, you know, the dollars are not there anymore for capacity projects, so we recognize that. And what are the things that we're going to do is to make sure that we collaborate with everybody to do that internally and externally with all of our stakeholders. Some of the opportunities and challenges, like I was talking about, we have great synergy with our planning section as part of the One Nevada plan that we marry up with the mission and vision and integrate with what they call the MODA, which is our multi-objective decision analysis tool. That's a performance-based decision tool. So we're looking at different criteria, and we wanted to make sure that we were doing that, you know, for all of the projects to increase, you know, our improved safety, preserve our infrastructure, look at optimizing our mobility, and then look at what are the measurement scales associated to those. So this is going to be a good tool for the department, and it'll prioritize projects based on that performance-based criteria. And utilizing that, we're going to also integrate that into our TSMO plan and get a little bit more in depth with it as far as TSMO strategies. Then we also want to make sure that we have, you know, some better, you know, positioning as all of our projects and programs, and I think that's the tool to help us do that. Some of the challenges, like I was talking about, engagement of the TCT, even though they've been designated, one of the things that would be better for us is to make sure that they're dedicated, not just designated, part of the TSMO efforts moving forward. And that change is always going to be difficult, probably with every institution, you know, moving forward with a TSMO program plan. Primer workshop goals and takeaways. We held ours back in December of 2017. You know, getting that buy-in, understanding TSMO on a federal level, and then, you know, the collaboration is essential, and get the buy-in, like I was talking about, for that TSMO plan. We wanted to look at, you know, how to formalize this program plan, what actions and approaches should be used, and what are our first steps. And I think the first step was to build that business case, and so we've done that. And that's going to help us move forward, and that's kind of one of the reasons why, you know, to move forward with your TSMO plan. Part of putting the TSMO in practice, the case study from Iowa. One of the things that helped with us with the TCT was Scott Marler, you know, the Director of Operations, and Pat was talking about him earlier, and some of the things that Iowa's been doing. The business case helped us develop our business case, and I think that was one of the key elements, you know, moving forward with that. And it's essential to our success, and I think for a lot of the DOT's success as well. The tactical elements, just like we're saying, they don't make that plan alone. So, you know, we want to grow and integrate it throughout that DOT. How are we going to get there? 2014, we did our CMM, probably the same as most other states. You know, we didn't rank that high. We had a little bit above a 1 on our CMM level of maturity. February till April, we started developing the state of the practice, and I was kind of talking about that earlier, where we're also within that 40% of traffic operations. Our plan is to probably stay the same thing. I don't think we're going to be moving towards a TSMO division, so we're going to look at, you know, the near term and then the future within the culture and the organization as how we progress within the program plan. The framework within Nevada, we've completed that as of June of 2017. We're still working together on that, you know, with the planning division and that synergy that we have going forward with that. We're looking to develop the TSMO review tool and all of the training associated within the TSMO plan, all the way from current till December of this year. We have those efforts going with Atkins and Pat Noyes and Associates. And then after that, we want to continue that outreach and training and partnering with all of our agencies too, and then do a reassessment and see where we are with that. That is my presentation. I want to thank you all for this time.
All right. Well, thank you, Rod. We appreciate your presentation. And for folks on the line here, I ask if you have any questions, please do type them into the chat box. And then, so next up, we're going to be hearing from Susan Anderson from the Arizona DOT.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jocelyn. I am pleased to be here today to discuss Arizona's experience with TSMO program planning and give a little history of where we've been and our current status and where we're going. As Rod actually just mentioned, I think most of us all started out working on our capability maturity model, and so wanted to let everyone know that Arizona ventured into the TSMO realm essentially the same way. We wanted to understand our current situation and underwent a self-assessment in March of 2014. We looked at the 6 dimensions of capability and found that our highest capabilities were in the areas of systems technology, culture, and collaboration, while our lowest score was in business processes. ADOT was performing a lot of the TSMO functions throughout the agency, but felt our internal business process could be enhanced if we were to bring all those groups together under one division. So we are one example of a DOT that did create an own TSMO division, and ADOT did create the new division in October of 2015 by bringing several existing groups together. As you can see here, TSMO is actually one of our 3 transportation divisions, along with the infrastructure delivery and operations and our multimodal planning division. One of the first steps that our TSMO division took was to develop a strategic plan, and I hope you can see here, you may not be able to read it, but at least see that there's a number of key focus areas and associated actions. The plan outlines recommendations in 2-year increments, acknowledging that many of our TSMO functions must evolve quickly over time. This plan has been very helpful for the division in focusing on our goals. In about late 2016, ADOT conducted a reassessment of our capabilities, and here you can see the original scores and the reassessment scores for the 2014 and 2016 capability maturity models. The scores increased in almost all the areas, especially within business processes and organization and staffing, and these increases are noted particularly as a result of the creation of our TSMO division. There's also some reorganization that was happening at ADOT between our districts as well that created many more alignments and efficiencies through the agency. As a result of the reassessment, ADOT was able to better define our current state of operations. The next few slides, just wanted to summarize those findings real quickly for you. With respect to business processes, there's always a challenge with planning and programming projects with TSMO elements, and TSMO could definitely benefit by having more of a long-term planning document, but we recognize that there's difficulties in doing that on a 5-year cycle, just with the nature of TSMO itself. And as always, we need to collaborate with many of our other divisions within ADOT. Within our systems and technology side, ADOT continues to see challenges between standardization versus innovation. We really want to achieve both, but sometimes that's very difficult. Meanwhile, we're also building on performance metrics, which rely on accurate and timely data. Like many agencies, ADOT is moving toward a more data-driven decision process to prioritize our projects and efforts. We're working to define our existing conditions also with our asset management system, and I like the comment how capacity is an asset. Meanwhile, ADOT is still challenged with understanding what TSMO is and what it is not, so our culture is evolving. This is requiring more definition of roles and responsibilities throughout the agencies, so efficiencies can be defined and overlaps in responsibilities kind of eliminated. There are many opportunities for various groups to work together across divisions and throughout the agencies as we continue to promote collaboration. So ADOT was thrilled when FHWA contacted us about the TSMO Program Planning Workshop. We saw that as quite an opportunity, especially given our recent reassessment. We know there was gaps, just like Jim had mentioned. There's gaps in the way we deliver TSMO and building it as we move forward. So we took the opportunity to have the one-day workshop in December of 2017 and found it was very successful for us. Some of the reasons, it brought many of our key stakeholders together at TSMO. The workshop focused internally just on ADOT operations, so we had the opportunity to bring representatives from our 3 transportation divisions, IDO, MPD, and TSMO, together, as well as folks from our financial management group and our contracts and P3 groups. We also invited our partners from FHWA Arizona Division to be there, as they have been so very supportive of us through our process of creating a TSMO division. Probably the biggest benefit I saw from the day was having everyone together, collaborating and discussing the elements of TSMO. Collectively, there was increased interest and support, and the workshop really identified the role and need for TSMO across ADOT. I'll note the hands-on activities that we did were very helpful and let us all reflect on the next steps needed to move the agency forward. Since the workshop, ADOT has had some notable outcomes. First, we have really been focusing on our staffing needs to make TSMO successful. As many of you have probably experienced, as a DOT is moving to a more operations-oriented role, a different set of skills are needed. Thus, ADOT's been working to identify those unique and specialized skill sets that we'll need from our staffing. We're finding a need for more data scientists and computer security analysts, something very different from our traditional engineering or construction background. This has meant we're working to update many of our position descriptions and reevaluate potential career paths within the agency. ADOT is also working to integrate TSMO into existing processes. This will continue to take more effort, but we're seeing improvements, definitely in the area of project development and design, our asset management program, and planning and programming. For example, to program projects with TSMO features has been a challenge. Projects to be programmed for funding must go into our STIP and have gone through an internal planning to programming process. So TSMO as a new division has not been fully engaged in that process. So we're learning we must come a little more prepared to participate in that. The P2P process actually divvies up projects into 3 types: preservation, modernization, and expansion projects. And you can see here the middle bucket is really where most of our TSMO projects would fall as modernization projects. And thus, they have to compete with funding against projects from other divisions as they move through the process and eventually into our 5-year program and into our STIP. So TSMO's role in the P2P process has now been identified a little better. While some of the projects that are nominated from larger planning studies may contain some TSMO features, TSMO now has a seat at the table as a technical team, and the division is invited to nominate projects that feed into the statewide pool of projects. So this has been a huge improvement over prior years, and the workshop with everyone there was able to help identify this need, and that change was implemented this year, and we're implementing it through this programming process. ADOT is going to continue to address challenges and issues, and some of our next steps we see on the forefront, further refining our programming process to develop a method of prioritizing our TSMO-related projects. We're also continuing to seek alternatives for procurement and funding of TSMO projects. There are likely P3 opportunities available that will help us advance new technologies, for instance. We're working to develop this program so we can start implementing that. And as we continue to gather more and more data, we are in need of improved data management systems, which will require further collaboration throughout the entire agency because, as we're all aware, data is coming from all sides. This will not be an isolated just to the TSMO division. So data management is affecting all of our transportation divisions. Finally, ADOT is seeking further opportunities to invest in our staff. We know we've got to provide our staff with an environment to grow and learn. We see TSMO as an exciting future for everyone to participate in, and we're looking at conducting more training really on and about TSMO, so that will continue into the future. With that, I'd highly recommend other states to take advantage of the program planning workshop to advance TSMO within their agencies. It was a great benefit to ADOT and helped us identify areas of improvement. That'll move us forward to develop a sustainable TSMO program. On behalf of ADOT, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate.
All right, well, thank you, Susan. Great presentation, and we do perhaps have a couple of questions here in the question box, but please do type in more questions. We encourage some discussion here, and the questions actually were typed in by me, but hopefully they'll help sort of seed the discussion here. So one question here is, has Nevada or any of the other states that are presenting or anyone who is on the line now used travel time reliability improvements when communicating the business case to decision makers and stakeholders? Would anyone on the line here like to address that? Rod, it looks like you may have written something regarding that.
And like I was saying, as part of that synergy with the One Nevada plan where we were doing that MODA, which is a multi-objective decision analysis tool for project prioritization, and it's using performance-based. So we did under a section of the criteria was system efficiency, and to be able to maximize that across all modes of transportation, we use travel time reliability as one of our outcome scales. So It's new right now, so we don't have any results, but we're expecting to use that as part of our project prioritization.
Okay, great. Anyone else in communicating why TSMO is important to stakeholders or other leaders? Anyone else rely on reliability?
Jocelyn, I'll say for Arizona, we have performance metrics that we feed up to our director's office, and part of those are trying to address congestion and reliability of our system within the Phoenix Metro Valley. So we have identified travel time reliability as a metric that we want to be tracking. That's obviously difficult to do, but we've selected a few corridors that we're actually looking at and able to put metrics to and track over time. So it's giving us a benchmark to shoot for.
Great.
In relation to that as well, Nevada, part of MAP 21, we're required to do that under the PM6. So, we're doing that, on our interstate and then also the non-interstate NHS routes.
Okay.
We do the same thing, but we're not doing it yet as far as project-based. So we're looking to, do that as part of our MODA.
Okay, great. And it looks like Minnesota DOT has used the travel time reliability measure to identify and prioritize potential projects statewide. A relatively new effort and has not yet been mainstreamed. Excellent. All right. The next question is for Arizona DOT. How has the TSMO division been collaborating or coordinating with infrastructure delivery in Arizona? Are there any lessons learned or processes that have been particularly useful there?
I think the lesson learned is always to have those relationships built and keep the communication open. We have found there was a challenge with a lot of projects being developed, and parts of certain aspects of our TSMO division would be invited to participate on delivery of projects, especially our traffic safety group. However, more of my team that works more with ITS and the technology components may have been left out of the table. So we've had to make efforts to reach across and get our folks in front of the project managers. That has worked over this past year because now the project managers work off of a checklist, so they've got a whole entire list of team players they need at the table for all their kickoff meetings and progress meetings as they move forward. We've made sure that we're now on that list and get included to come to the initial kickoff and all of the progress meetings as we move forward. So that has helped out quite a bit, but it takes that effort to just reach out and ask for the opportunity to participate.
Great, great. Anyone else on the line who wants to talk about integrating TSMO with your infrastructure delivery division? All right, well then let's move on to Eric Hill's question here. Since MPOs are responsible for prioritizing projects, how has TSMO been integrated into their selection process or development in their internal operations?
I'll take it. This is Monica. I'll take a stab at answering that for us. While we don't, I wouldn't say we necessarily have absolute formalized processes to address that. We have done exactly what Susan was referencing, is kind of inserted ourselves into the process. And that's been through a concerted corridor planning process that we've kicked off, where we looked at all of our congested corridors within the states and brought all the stakeholders around the table, which included divisions within our agency, but also local agencies, the MPO, public transportation, all of those people around the table. And essentially it was kicked off with the idea that roadway widening was not an option to be considered, and we took TSMO strategies as the tool set to those meetings. And so that's how we've begun our influencing of the MPO process. That does not mean that we still don't see local agencies selecting maybe what we wouldn't consider TSMO first strategies. We also are using the influence of some of our TSMO tools through our public transportation grant selection cycles, requiring that they explain how they are using TSMO strategies, which kind of in a way is just a pure education. They have to go to our website, review what TSMO strategies are, and then illustrate how their grant application fulfills TSMO strategies. So those are a couple examples of what we're doing.
Great. All right, anyone else? Okay, and so then we've got another question or two that has come in. Eric Hill, again, was wondering, and this one's for Susan, was the capability maturity model assessment conducted by internal staff or an outside consultant?
And Pat, you may know more than I do, because I know I'm relatively new to TSMO. As far as it's my understanding that FHWA did the formal capability maturity model with ADOT staff, so kind of a mixture of both, I would say.
Okay, great. All right, and we may get Ralph Volpe maybe typing in here an answer about that. And so then also Michael Schmeyen, I'm so sorry for mispronouncing your last name, but what data types and data sources have you used to help make the business case for TSMO in an agency? What was helpful? What catches management's attention? Anyone willing to take a stab at that?
Just from Nevada's perspective, so like the U.S. Census Bureau, for one, you know what I mean, for the population on that one there, for us to do our data case for that. And safety, you know, to supply from your safety highway plan and everything. So the statistics on that, we did a lot of that too. So freight and mobility comes from you, hopefully, you know, from your freight section of your department. You know, Atkins Association, you know, congestion and everything, you know, related to that with our source, you know, for congestion. We use INRIX for a lot of our data there.
Great, great. Anyone else? Or are folks not yet working on making the business case?
I can offer up from Arizona with our performance metrics. Our management is looking for data that helps them sell their case forward. So it's information that is simple and easy for everyone to understand is really how we're trying to format our performance metrics as we give those forward. So for instance, like congestion, as we're looking at congestion on our freeways throughout the Phoenix area, how to deliver that message in something that others that are not in the transportation world would understand. We have actually formed a metric that has most of the corridors, and we're now reporting an average travel speed. So can you travel at 50 miles per hour more or less throughout the valley during peak hours? So that's something that everyone who drives a car understands. If I'm able to go 50, I'm actually cruising along pretty well, but if it's dropping below that, I know there's congestion. That's what congestion means to everyone else. So we're trying to find a simple way to relate the overwhelming amount of data that we have, but put it relatable so anyone would understand.
Great, all right. Okay, and Ralph Volpe did mention that the ADOT's initial CMM was conducted as part of the SHARP 2 Reliability Organizing for Operations effort there with Federal Highway Support Contractors Resource Center and the Arizona Division Office. Okay, oh, and before we go to Daniel, we've got one more question here from Michael. What Monica had mentioned about how TSMO must be more than single occupant vehicles is very true. It's very obvious that we are drowning in SUVs. We need to work on non-SUV solutions and approaches. What level of maturity have these agencies achieved relative to multimodal strategies? Anyone want to discuss your work on including multimodal strategies and I guess implementing those?
If I can take a stab, I see he had a question up above about data types and data sources, and if I can combine the two questions, I'll try to answer that. we, for a business case about using data as well as why SOV won't answer it, our agency put together a business case that basically projected if we could, if the world was infinite in possibilities, how much money would it take to build our way out of congestion? And it, of course, you can all imagine, it's this astronomical number in Seattle. And then, and so you take that and you equate that to a tax hike of what that would, and everybody's just appalled. And then you bring that down to, okay, if we just wanted to provide reliability, what would that cost? Still in terms of SOV. And then our presentation takes that and translates that for providing a reliable system in a multimodal where you're emphasizing person throughput, not occupancy throughput. What does that then cost? And it's been, I think it's been one of the most well-received presentations to politicians, the public, internally. It really just shows people, one, we can't build our way out of this, and two, we have to be multimodal to even get a reliable system. And so that's just an example that came to mind of how we're illustrating that story with data and the shift to multimodal.
Sounds like a great example. All right, well now let's move on to Daniel Great's presentation here. Daniel is going to be giving a wrap-up of the TSMO roundtables that have been occurring over the past, I think, year or two. Daniel, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so just to add some well, I'm going to be giving, as Jocelyn said, a summary of what came out of the TSMO Program Planning Roundtables that we've been conducting over the last, I guess, year and a half. But before I dive into that, I'm going to give you some brief background, some stuff that you've already heard before, actually. We conducted the CMM workshops across the country where folks looked at the 6 dimensions that were mentioned earlier and conducted a SWOT analysis to determine pretty much where these sites were in terms of the operations program, and also talked about, you know, what it would take to move them forward. Here is a, I guess, depiction of the areas that we visited and conducted these workshops during the SHOP 2 era, of which we've probably done somewhere around 40 to 42 workshops between 2009 and 2015. But since then, we've probably done in total somewhere around 50 to 55, maybe possibly 60 workshops now that I think about it. And these are the areas that we visited. As a part of that workshop, there was an implementation plan that was, or framework that was put together as a means to help folks kind of formulate how to, you know, move the capability and maturity levels forward for the dimensions. And as we were tracking this information, what we found is that, and Jim mentioned this earlier, that the TSMO program plan development was something that was, it was the #1 item that folks had called out to be pursued. And so when we looked at that, we kind of looked out across the country to determine, you know, who had plans already developed. And as you can imagine, back then there wasn't very many, if any at all. But when we looked out there, we found a few folks that had developed plans and some folks that were in the middle of developing them, and other folks, as you can imagine, were at the beginning of trying to figure out, you know, whether or not they were going to develop a plan or not. So we put together the roundtables to have somewhat of a discussion to kind of talk about the do's and don'ts, learning lessons learned, as well as the growing pains of developing a TSMO program plan. As I mentioned before, we have conducted a total of 7 roundtables with a TSMO theme. However, 4 of those 7 centered on TSMO program plan development. And just to make a correction or an addition here, for the winter 2017 roundtable, TSMO program plan roundtable, TxDOT as well as Iowa were a part of that session as well. The TSMO Program Primer has examples of several plans from across the country. One of the things that you will notice with some of the plans is that they can be rather lengthy in terms of kind of reading in one setting what the entire plan it covers. As one of the lessons learned from one of the latest roundtables, as a matter of fact, the very last roundtable that we just had a couple months ago, ADOT took a very unique approach in developing their plan, and essentially what they did is they took chapters of the plan and developed those into briefs that were anywhere from 8 to 48 pages per brief as a means to make it more easy in terms of reading it in one setting. I thought that was a pretty innovative way of going and simple way of going about putting the plan together so that folks would actually sit down and read the plan. Some other lessons learned from the roundtable. In terms of cost to develop a TSMO program plan, the cost varied from 0 to around $400K. As you can imagine, there are varying scopes, and a lot of it depends on the scope of the plan as to how much money you will spend, and also the amount of consultant assistance that you will require. For the folks, I think it was Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, they essentially spent 0 in terms of consultant funding or monies because they did all of their plan development in-house. So essentially the only thing that it cost them was the existing staff, I guess, budget that they had for the folks that were on the team. Some folks took a 50-50 approach where they had in-house expertise as well as consultant assistance. And Iowa was the state that kind of stands out to me that used this method, and I think their cost was somewhere around $150,000 to $165,000. Then, of course, there were the folks that used primarily consultant assistance, where it varied anywhere from that. Like I said, I'm gonna say based on the Sharp 2 tracking, it varied from anywhere from $90,000 to about $300K. The time frame typically ranged between 6 months to 18 months. I didn't see anything that went any further than 18 months as far as the development of it. And many folks, according to the roundtable, in terms of a plan format, took somewhat of a tiered approach, and we talked about this earlier, where there's a strategic piece to it, a programmatic piece, and a tactical piece. The strategic piece tied in with the overall agency goals by clearly stating the goals, objectives, and mission, or TSMO mission and vision. And then the second piece, which was the program plan itself, looked at how the organization was organized and when in terms of the institutional requirements, and in terms of the requirements for addressing issues as it pertains to specific performance of the system. This is where the tactical piece came in terms of the activities and TSMO strategies that were going to be used. In terms of the plan approach, one of the models and mantras that I've been hearing a lot, and it's been becoming very, I guess, popular, is the TSMO first approach. Essentially what this says is that until TSMO fails or is found not to apply, only then will you look at other means to, address system performance as far as the existing system is concerned. And this was done from a regional perspective and corridor-based perspective. The regional perspective, we talked about this earlier in terms of building those relationships with your stakeholders from a regional perspective, both internally and externally, is key. Having everyone sit at the table and speak about the system operationally and being on the same page in terms of the activities that are going to be pursued in order to address those operational needs. The corridor base, and Monica touched on this earlier, this is where folks did somewhat of an assessment of the corridors within their region or state and rank the corridors, I guess, from, like say from a perspective of top 3 to top 5 in terms of the corridors that were the most operationally sensitive. And along those corridors that were identified, again, partnering with the stakeholders in order to come up with a plan to speak about and pursue the operational strategies to address the issues that were needed for better system performance. Other lessons learned, performance measures. Whenever there was a new technology that was, strategy, TSMO strategy, that was going to go into place, there was a particular effort made to do somewhat of a before and after study so that you would have the information moving forward for future projects that incorporated the same TSMO strategy. Throughout my travels, as well as during the roundtables, I heard the term data rich come up quite a bit, where folks they have tons of data, but there isn't really a formal process in terms of pulling everything together to develop performance measures in a way that they could use to for decision making. To my knowledge, the only state DOT that has a performance measurement or management plan would be Oregon DOT. Their plan, I believe, is online and was published back in February of 2017. When we speak about communicating TSMO, the key there is to communicate often, and keep in mind that you have various audiences that you have to communicate TSMO to. And with that being said, it's probably a very good idea, and we found this out during the roundtable, is that to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row in terms of communicating your story or even defining what TSMO is. Because again, it's best to consider the audience when you're speaking about TSMO benefits, whether it's a 2-minute elevator speech to a legislator and giving him the benefits of TSMO internally with peers, externally with peers, or with the traveling public. Consider the audience. We talked about leadership and leadership buy-in. That is very critical because leadership essentially sets the tone. Just to give you an example, a couple years ago, John Corbett and myself, we went out to Iowa DOT when they were launching their TSMO plan, and Paul Trombino, who was the director of the DOT, got up and gave a speech. And as a part of that overall workshop, I'm going to call it, there was a series of breakouts after, the morning session. And I kind of floated around just to hear what folks were talking about. And it turns out that a lot of what Paul Trombino, the director, mentioned in the speech resonated with each group. You could hear remnants of his speech being recited or talked about during the breakouts. So leadership definitely sets the tone. Some common areas that we found in terms of communicating the benefits of TSMO and quick success stories centered around work zone, TIM, as well as signals, and primarily because the data is already there. In rural areas, the easy lifts in terms of making the case for TSMO centered around rural weather management, EMS, incident management, and freight. When it came to funding, some states had set aside some funding in terms of for TSMO and also as a lump sum item on their budget, but CMAQ seemed to be the commonly used fund. Another exercise was whenever there's a major construction project, folks made sure to have TSMO as a part of it or incorporated in that planning process, and that seemed to work well. So with that, I'm going to stop and see whether or not we have time for some additional questions. Here we have the contact information for folks within headquarters as well as the Resource Center if you have any further questions that you would like to pursue at another time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Daniel. And we've got just a couple of questions that came in. I know we are running out of time here, but these probably can be answered fairly quickly. The last one is from Eric Hill. Daniel, are the lessons learned that you discussed there documented anywhere? Daniel, are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. They're not documented in a document anywhere in terms of literature, but the actual roundtables themselves were recorded and are available via the center's website.
Great. All right. Michael had a question. The roundtables sound interesting. Do you have any thoughts about the Regional Operations Leadership Forums? You might explain what those are, or perhaps Jim could explain that too.
The Regional Operations Leadership Forum is very similar to what we call the RF, use the RS for, and essentially what they do is they bring in leaders from a particular region to kind of go across TSMO opportunities within that region from a leadership perspective. That particular forum has been helpful. Tracy Scribble could probably give you more information on it, or Jim, for that matter.
Yeah. So contact one of those folks on the last slide of Daniel's presentation there, and he can give you more information if you're interested in the Regional Operations Leadership Forums. All right, with that, I think that is all of the questions that we received. Jim, would you like to say a few parting words?
Okay, sure. This was very, very helpful, and I just appreciate the context provided by the three states, and I think we're building some momentum here. So thank you to all. Thanks to Daniel for kind of summarizing what you found from the roundtables. I will mention, as I said in the beginning, we sort of kind of a pausing here after our initial outreach foray with this area, but we intend to start kind of a second tier of outreach and workshops and technical assistance on TSMO program planning. So like Ralph mentioned in his chat pod, you can contact your division office or one of the FHWA folks on the webinar here today. And if we didn't mention already, a link to that primer was provided on one of the earlier slides where we showed the cover, so that's where you can download it. So other than that, thank you, and I'll let you get back to your work day, and appreciate everyone's participation.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jocelyn. A great discussion and great presentations. I hope everybody enjoyed it and found it helpful. Just like I said in the beginning, this session was recorded, and the PowerPoint slides are also available through the NOCO website. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.